Thank you once again from CrunchEconometrix. On the screen is the output from our previous estimations. Over here, these are the outputs for the VAR estimation. And here, these are the outputs for the variance decomposition. I chose to put the two of them neatly on PowerPoint so that interpretation can be given to both results at the same time. Remember, after your estimations, you cannot interpret your variance decomposition results without referring to the VAR results. They are somewhat related in interpretation. You are likely to see the outcome of your VAR results in the variance decomposition in some way. So your interpretation must be related to both results. But before I go into the interpretation, I need to inform you of some terminologies I'll be using during my interpretation. You can see on the screen, I have a generalized interpretation of results. I have divided this into two. When you're interpreting the main variable in reference to other variables. When you're interpreting the main variable, these are some of the terminologies you may have to use in relation to the effects from other variables. What do I mean? If on the main variable, you notice that the variable has a strong influence on its own self, you can say that variable exhibits strong endogeneity or is strongly endogenous. If you also observe from the percentage accounted forecast error variance, you notice that that variable has a weak influence on its own variable. You can say that variable is weakly endogenous. If you also observe that the influence from other variables is strong, then you can also say on the main variable that it is weakly endogenous. Okay, now let's look at the influence from other variables. If they exhibit a weak influence on the dependent variable, you will say that they have a strongly exogenous impact. And if you also observe that they exhibit a strong influence on the dependent variable, then you can say that they are least exogenous, meaning they have a strong endogenous influence. So least exogenous and strongly endogenous implies the same thing. So when you are interpreting, you may use any of these terminologies or you may design your own. Okay, starting with the VAR results interpretation. I said this several times in my tutorials that VAR estimates are simply OLS estimates, and when you are interpreting, you give it just the ceteris paribus interpretation you give to any OLS results. So looking at real GDP, I can see from the results that real GDP strongly influences its own self, going by the T statistics of 7.6. And same thing from EDS, the lag of EDS strongly predicts real GDP, going by the T value of 2.03. Government spending does not have any significant impact on real GDP. So if I was to interpret, how will I go about it? The past realization of real GDP is associated with 99.27% increase in real GDP on average ceteris paribus. For the EDS coefficient, I'll simply say a percentage increase in external debt stock accounts for 31.1% increase in real GDP on average ceteris paribus. Looking at the external debt stock results, from what we can see from the T statistics, only that of EDS is significant enough to predict itself. So again, I'll simply say the past realization of external debt stock is associated with 70.6% increase in external debt stock on average ceteris paribus. For government spending, I can see here that real GDP and government spending itself have strong significant influence on government spending. So I can simply say a percentage increase in real GDP is associated with 44.04% increase in government spending on average ceteris paribus. While government spending, I would say the past realization of government spending is associated with 59% increase in government spending on average ceteris paribus. So that is the simplest interpretation you should give to all your VAR estimates. Now moving on to the variance decomposition results. Where the table is designed, I showed you earlier on at the top here, The variables whose variance is decomposed are listed. So this is for real GDP, this is for external debt stock, and this is for government spending. So how will you read the table? Across the rows, they indicate the percentage of forecast error variance by the variable at the top head. So what does that mean? Each of the figures you are seeing here will tell you the percentage forecast error variance in real GDP. Same thing for external debt stock. All the figures here, when I'm trying to explain now, you will see what I mean. They will tell us the percentage forecast error variance in external debt stock, and same thing goes for government spending. Remember when I was selecting the forecast period, I chose 5 years. So I just want to forecast 5 years into the future. And I'm going to split my periods into long run and short run. My short run period will be year 1 and year 2, while my long run periods will be from 3, 4, 5 years. So my interpretation for real GDP will go this way. In the short run, looking at year 1, I'll simply say that 100% of forecast error variance in real GDP is explained by the variable itself. So that means other variables in the model do not have any strong influence on real GDP. In that case, those variables have strong exogenous impact. They have strong exogenous impact. Exogenous in the sense that they do not influence real GDP at all in the short run. Even looking at year 2, influences from external debt stock and government expenditure is barely 4%. So again, those two variables exhibit strong exogeneity. That is, they have weak influence in predicting real GDP in the future. Now let's look at the long run for real GDP. In the long run, 83.3% of forecast error variance of that variable is explained by real GDP itself. So real GDP is showing strong influence right from the short-run period into the future. And looking at external debt stock, we can see that the influence is rising gradually over the years, from 3 to 7 to 14. But overall, it is still weak. The influence on real GDP is still weak. Looking at government spending, the influence on real GDP is very, very insignificant. So this is how you should interpret your results for variance decomposition. Let me move straight on to external debt stock. My explanation for external debt stock is very similar to that of real GDP, because we can see from the external debt stock decomposition, the variable strongly predicts itself from year 1 into the future year 5. The influence from other variables in the model are not significant at all. By the time you sum up the variation coming from real GDP and government spending, is barely 9%. So external debt stock is a strong influencer of itself into the future. Lastly, on government spending, we can see that right from the short-term period into the future, government spending does not strongly predict itself. A very strong predictor of government spending we can see is real GDP, accounting for 40.24 forecast error variance in government spending, even in the short run. And by the time we move gradually into the long run, real GDP is accounting for almost 73% forecast error variance in government spending. And likewise, as we move further into the future, the forecast error variance on government spending itself dwindles. We can see from 59 to 37 to 25. So for government spending, real GDP is a strong influencer in predicting variation in government spending. It's a very strong predictor. And like I said before, you cannot interpret your variance decomposition results without referring to your VAR results, because there is a somewhat close relationship between these two results. Let me take you back to the real GDP results. For the variance decomposition, we observed that the real GDP results itself strongly influences itself, right from the short-run period to the long-run period. And we can also see that here from the VAR output. The t-statistics is 7.6, indicating almost 100% variation, increasing it. You can see 99.2% increase. That's almost 100%. And the result from the VAR and the result from the variance decomposition is very close to what we have in the VAR. Also looking at the forecast error variance from external debt stock in predicting real GDP. It also increases over the years into the long run, taking about 14.3%. And we can also see an evidence from the VAR result. In the VAR result, we notice that external debt stock has a positive influence on real GDP, accounting for about 31.1% association in the increase in the real GDP. So we can see a similarity between the VAR result on real GDP and the variance decomposition result on real GDP. Let's take a look at the external debt stock results, relating it to the VAR and the variance decomposition. The results are also very close. For the VAR result of external debt stock, only the variable predicts itself. You can see the statistics at 5.18, and it accounts for about 70.5% increase in external debt stock. And we can also see here for external debt stock that it is the only strong influencer of itself. It has a very, very strong endogenous influence on itself. Lastly, looking at the VAR result on government spending, two coefficients are strongly predicting government spending, that is real GDP and government spending itself. We can see here by their t-statistics. And now going back to the variance decomposition result, real GDP is a very strong influencer of government spending. The influence is increasing from year 1 into the future year 5, predicting 73% by the 5th year, while even the influence of government spending is dwindling gradually from 59 to 25. So we can see a close relationship between the results of the VAR and the results from variance decomposition. I hope this tutorial has been helpful. So going forward now, if you are to estimate a VAR model and you want to compute the variance decomposition and also interpret your results, I believe you can do so now and even do better than what I taught you. Just follow my example and you can modify the interpretation to suit your own study. Thank you for watching. I hope to be back very soon for more interesting videos that will help your thesis or your research or that manuscript you are writing. Thank you for subscribing for our videos. Thank you for sharing the links, and thank you for your comments and your likes. Don't go away. I'll be right back.